Great. Good evening, everybody. And thank you all for joining our Division 3 resolutions clinic. My name is Barbara Davis, for those who don't know me, and I am the chair of Division 3. Also with us tonight is Kathy Hubley, who is vice chair of Division 3. Jason Frazier, president-elect and chair of the Legislative Committee for MASC, and Anthony Andronico, who is behind the scenes making this all work. So without further ado, I'd like to get started. Jason?
Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate you having me here tonight, and welcome to all my fellow school committee members from across the Commonwealth. I see some friends in the audience, people I've known for some years, and some new faces as well. Welcome to you all. I'm here today as the chair of the Resolutions Committee. That's an ex officio office I hold as being president-elect of MASC. And as Barbara said, I've also, for the past 4 years, been the chair of the Legislative Committee as well. What we're going to be talking about tonight are actually the planks that build the platform that MASC hands off to our executive director and the Legislative Committee to move forward our agenda as an association on behalf of the public schools of Massachusetts and the public students of our schools. So I'm thrilled for you to be here tonight. I'm going to run through what our meeting actually is, what it looks like, and how it functions. In essence, the resolutions are just one part of our business meeting. This is our annual association business meeting where we conduct the business of the association. And for those of you who are from town governments, the way this is run is very analogous to how town meetings are run. For those of you who come from a city form of government, the way we run our meeting at the Cape is a little bit different than a school committee meeting. So we're going to walk through some of those procedures. One of the items that has been pretty popular in the past few years is I will run through the resolutions with you at the delegate assembly. And if we have no holds, that means everyone in the room feels comfortable voting the language as is. We can vote those as a slate, and then we can move on to any of the items that were held for later discussion. So just be prepared for that opportunity right at the beginning as we start to hop into resolutions, of thinking on the resolutions that you, if you are the voted delegate from your school committee, the resolutions that you are comfortable as is starting right now. Okay, so this is an important point. Only elected, voted upon members from your school committee, and it's one delegate per school committee, has the right to be at our business meeting down the Cape and vote on behalf of your committee. I don't know how many of you have received the manual in the mail already, but we have moved the delegate assembly. I think this is an important note to make, that the delegate assembly will not be on Wednesday evening this year. It's actually going to be held on Friday, November 8th instead. And prior to that, there will be a resolutions clinic very much like this one, where people can get some information and ask some last minute questions before we head into the delegate assembly itself. So Barbara, if you could move on, I'll start going through some of the resolutions for us this evening. The Resolutions Committee has gone through all these resolutions and passed them on to the board of directors. So what's being presented to you tonight has already gone through a 2-step trial phase. It's been approved by the resolution subcommittee, and it has also been approved by the MASC board of directors themselves before we published and sent it out to our membership. So by default, I am in favor of all the resolutions you're going to see tonight. And I just wanted to be very clear on that matter before I get into some of the details. I've voted on these measures twice already, and whether or not my vote carried, I am going to go with the will of the committees and speak to these as if I am a proponent of all of these this evening. So we did group some of the resolutions together this year. Right here on the screen right now is one having to do with coming up with an alternative to the MCAS. We understand that there is accountability measures mandated by federal and state agencies that school districts have to meet. MASC has already been working with DESE and the interim commissioner, working on some methodology to come up with alternatives to high stakes testing for districts to implement. As you were all aware, there's also a ballot measure. MASC is not taking a position on the ballot measure moving forward, but we have taken positions in the past several years at delegate assemblies against high stakes testing and even calling for a moratorium on MCAS. While we do an investigation and come up with an alternative form of assessing our students. So this resolution right here, again, is reasserting MASC's viewpoint, but this is coming from the board of directors to the membership. And what I really want you to focus on tonight is the therefore let it be resolved parts of these resolutions. When myself and Glenn go and speak on behalf of the association to legislators, we don't really bring with us the exact language of the whereases. We really try and focus on the therefore let it be resolved portions of resolutions. So you can see here that this would ask for a development of an alternative. It wants the legislature to launch comprehensive evaluation to see if there's any biases involved in the current assessments that we have, which anecdotally, many people have pointed out there are some inherent biases within the MCAS testing that we've seen across the state in a variety of ways. Again, a moratorium pushing off MCAS testing and looking at an alternative to high stakes testing. And regardless of what happens with question 2, and regardless of what happens with this resolution here, one of the platforms of MASC has always been against high stakes testing. We feel a single metric being used against a student, usually in a punitive manner, is not an effective educational practice and doesn't help advance student achievement. So this is the first of 2 resolutions on student achievement. All right, Barbara, can you move to the next one?
Whoops. Sorry.
It's okay. All right. So the second on student achievement is increasing the compulsory age of attendance in Massachusetts public schools from the age of 16 to the age of 18. Our neighboring state to the north, New Hampshire, has enacted legislation like this, and they have had great success in lowering the dropout rate. It has not eliminated dropping out of school, but it is definitely emboldened parents to say it's the law, you need to stay in school to 18. We do realize that this may create some unintended consequences that we'd have to look into, like some wraparound services to support kids who do traditionally drop out at the age of 16, 17 in Massachusetts public schools. And for a lot of time, that's socioeconomic. It could be that that child is staying home to help take care of family members. It could be that they have children of their own. It could also be that they need to find gainful employment to bring income into the home. So I believe that this is an important measure for us to consider, and I support increasing the dropout age to 18 in Massachusetts, but it will definitely create some situations where we need to look at those wraparound services to support those kids who traditionally would have dropped out if the law allowed it. We don't want this to become a punitive measure again against those kids who traditionally would have dropped out, but now, if this law passes, wouldn't be able to. So this is where I want you to stop for a second, Barbara. So the first 2 resolutions can be passed as a single measure this year. Okay, so we realized as an organization last year that there was some issues with the delegate assembly. There was some confusion with the parliamentary procedures. There was some people in the room who seemed to just want to derail the democratic process. And we're trying to streamline the process this year. And one of the options we're giving to the delegates is to vote the first two resolutions that you saw this evening as a slate. Okay, it would literally just take someone coming up to the podium and saying, I'd like to split the two resolutions in a majority vote to take them one at a time. But if the majority of delegates feel comfortable taking this as a slate and voting it on as a slate, we're hoping that that might move the process a little bit quicker. There's only one way to tell, and that's to put it into practice and see how it turns out in November. But do any of you have any questions about resolution 1 on MCAS or resolution 2 on increasing the compulsory age to 18? And I don't know if anybody's monitoring the chat. Go ahead, Emily.
I have a question. I'm just wondering why you would put them forth with a slate. What's the rationale for that?
If they're non-controversial enough that the majority of the delegates want to move them forward instead of engaging in debate on each of them on their individual merits, we're hoping it might expedite the process and allow us to focus in on more controversial resolutions that our delegates may want to speak to in greater depth.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Is it appropriate to raise concerns in some of the therefores and not others? So absolutely, and that's also an opportunity. I'm answering the chat right now. The question was, is it appropriate to raise concerns about some of the therefores and not others? This is where you might want to send an amendment to MASC as soon as possible. Part of the problem we had last year at the Delegate Assembly was people amending on the floor, and it just got out of control. So I would highly encourage those of you who are part of this process and who want to bring amendments to the membership to do it beforehand and to email it into Glenn. So we have it on hand and can put it out to the members as soon as possible. How do you prevent the punitive measures? Ronnie, that's a great question. I don't know how we prevent those punitive measures. It was part of the conversation that came up when we first discussed it at the resolutions committee. There was 2 members from urban districts, one who was extremely in favor of moving the compulsory age to 18, and one from an urban setting who was concerned about how it may affect kids who would traditionally drop out. We couldn't find solutions that evening. We talked about those wraparound services I mentioned earlier, and that would have to be part of the process. As you all know, even if we pass this resolution in November, a new legislative cycle is starting on Beacon Hill at the end of January, beginning of February 2025, and most likely no new laws will be passed until 2026 or so. So this gives us some time to dig into it with our legislative partners and with the Mass Association of Superintendents and other educational minded people to see if we can find some of those solutions, but also keep the kids engaged. The other thing, Ronnie, is we can look north to see what New Hampshire's done to help support those students as well, since they've already done this and we have some data we can glean from them. Is there a recording of the previous discussion so we can hear the issues that have already been debated? No. The resolutions committee does not meet as a public body. We met back at the end of June and we had those conversations in the confidence of that room. Nothing of it was confidential. I'd be happy to try and explain any of the nuances to you at this point. The minutes of that meeting have been shared with the association via Glenn and his office. But no, we did not record that meeting of that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions that I've missed in the comments section or any of you have for me this evening? All right. So I'm going to move on to resolution 3, but I can always come back to items if something comes across your mind while we're together this evening. So Barbara, when you have the opportunity.
Yeah, working on it.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right. So this year we also put together 2 resolutions on student safety. Again, at the Delegate Assembly, If the delegates so decide to make a motion to separate them out and to debate them on their own merits, it will just take a simple majority to do that. And I'll go through these two with you tonight. So resolution 3 is on the safe storage of firearms. And Barbara, if you could please go to the therefore let it be resolved part. Some of you may be familiar with this resolution. It did come up last year at the delegate assembly. It was one of the resolutions that was highly debated, and we decided to table it to do further research and allow more time for the proponents to come back with some evidence of the ease of their central administrators putting this message out to their district, and the cooperation between their central administration and the police department in their municipalities. So this has been resubmitted for us to consider again. And again, this would be MASC just recommending to districts that their superintendent create an appropriate communication, which a template has already been created that can be shared with the association members, to parents and guardians that explain the importance of secure firearm storage to protect children and teens, and obligations consistent under Massachusetts safe storage laws. MASC urges other communities to work with local law enforcement agencies, health agencies, nonprofit organizations to collaborate and increase efforts to inform parents and guardians of their obligation regarding secure storage of firearms. So again, this is not telling any school committee or school district they have to do it. If we vote yes on this in November, MASC would put out that template language as supplied by the school districts that have already done this, and just urge you and your school district to send this out to your communities as well. And the broad consensus, both at the resolution subcommittee and the board of directors of MASC, was if this can save one life, it's worth a couple minutes of effort to send out a message to our students and their families. There is question of overreach here as well. So we understand that that may be part of the conversation at the delegate assembly. The MASC board of directors did deem that this is within the scope of our prudence, since it's concerning the safety of students within our schools and even at home. All right, let's move on to number 4, and then I will answer questions on resolution 3 and resolution 4. All right, so resolution 4, this again is one that we saw last year, and this was pretty new idea that a lot of us hadn't considered at the time that it was brought to the delegate assembly. A lot of us understand that is a chronic problem with school buses being passed even when their stop sign is out. Data has come to light that there's over 40 million violations of school bus stop signs being violated per year. Some of this data has been taken locally at this point. We have some towns that have put cameras to count how many violations have occurred, including Peabody School Committee, which is the proponent of this resolution. There was also language put forth in the legislature this year that was reported out favorably to put surveillance arms with cameras on school bus stop signs with the ability to enforce tickets based upon those violations. So what this resolution would do would be to support the legislation that has already been filed and will need to be refiled since it wasn't passed during this session, to allow the authority for school buses to have cameras put on them and for tickets to be issued based on that video evidence of violations. So these two are the student safety resolutions as proposed. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about resolution 3 on the safe storage of firearms, or on resolution 4 about school bus stop arm surveillance?
Hello, this is Victor Machado from Somerset. On number 3, my only concern is that the MASC is going to be drafting some type of document that superintendents may or may not send, depending on what the district would want to share. My question is more, why wouldn't we want the Attorney General's office to write such communication and then we share what actual law is instead of an interpretation of the local chief and the superintendent?
That's a great question. And the answer I have for you is the work put forth by the committee that submitted resolution number 3 included over 87 footnotes to their research and their citing of MGL and CMR. So a lot of that work has already been put into vetting this out. Obviously, before MASC sent it out to school districts, we would check with our legal counsel. Pat Francomano is with us this evening. He's MASC's legal counsel. And we would vet it out with our other friends and some agencies from the state, like the Attorney General's office, as you mentioned, just to make sure that we weren't putting out erroneous information based on this template another school committee put together for us. So well-founded concerns and good point to bring up. And I believe that's how we would answer the concerns you just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So I see a lot of other questions popping up here too. Was there any research into regional districts that are sort of outside of the authority of the town and do not own their bus fleet? We did have a regional school committee member create the resolution you're looking at. So Peabody is home to Beverly Griffin Dunn, who is our current MASC Secretary Treasurer, and she's part of North Shore Essex Regional. So it would be the local municipality who would have the right to give the ticket based upon where the violation of the stop sign occurred. So that language is there. Even though the bus might be owned by the region or might be owned by a private vendor, that information would be shared with the local police department, and that would be the ticketing authority to send out citations to drivers. All right. I'm reading some of the comments right now. Yes, firearm storage is already the law in Massachusetts. For example, if it's proven that you didn't safely secure a firearm and it's used to commit a felony, you can be charged with the same felony your firearm was used to perpetrate. So there are some pretty severe penalties for not safely storing firearms in Massachusetts. This would be simply to send out that information to parents and encourage them to make sure if they have firearms in the home that they are stored per Massachusetts state law. Unfortunately, a lot of evidence has been coming out recently that it was unsecured firearms in many of the homes of students who have then gone into schools and created some atrocities and unfortunately resulted in the loss of lives of students. Unsecured weapons have been used in many of those, unfortunately.
Jason, if I could, this is Pat.
Hey, Pat, how are you?
Hi, Pat.
Good. Hi, everyone. Just going back again to the resolution number 3, I am not even sure that I would be recommending that we send out a draft information bulletin for schools to use. I think all we'll be doing is exactly what the resolution is saying, is recommending that the districts ask their superintendents and staff to create something. I wouldn't anticipate we'd be providing model language for that notice.
I appreciate you being here for that, Pat. And we did know that there is model language from that school committee that put forth resolution number 3. So maybe other school committees could reach out to them for some ideas, but it wouldn't come directly from MASC. Does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, but and again, we can certainly make it available as an example and distribute it, but not say this is what should be used.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Pat.
I'm sorry, it's Victor Machado again. If I could just follow up. See, now as a member of the MASC, I'm a little concerned that we're asking or recommending towns and cities to send out a letter, but again, we don't know exactly what is being sent by community A versus community B. But yet MASC might be named, based on the recommendation of the MAC, we're sending that information to those homes. Obviously, this is a security matter and safety matter. I would rather prefer, again, that we receive a document from, like a pamphlet from the Attorney General's office, and send it to all the communities. This way, the MASC is recommending that the Attorney General's office, who oversees the gun laws in the state, send out that information, how important it is for gun safety. But having, again, saying that the MAC recommends something that we don't even know what is being sent out is definitely something that we should never, ever support.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think that our role is to allow districts to do what they think is appropriate. And in fact, the recommendation, it's as was pointed out, we focus on the be it resolved. And the be it resolved part recommends that MASC should recommend all districts direct their superintendents and staff to create an appropriate communication. That's what the recommendation is, so that those districts can work with their specific local police, and they can work with certainly we would, let the appropriate state agencies know this is the recommendation, and make them, hopefully they would be available to work with individual districts. But crafting a one size fits all for each district is somewhat usurping the role of the school committees. The superintendent should decide what's, with the collaboration of the school committees, should decide what is, what's appropriate language. And if they want to use the model that was, that one district has, there's certainly nothing wrong with that.
This is Ronnie Wool talking.
Hey, Ronnie.
I tend to disagree with both of what they're saying. The devil is in the details. If you say that each individual school district needs to follow along what they believe or their city believes, it's a menu for convolution. Just totally doesn't make any sense. You need to follow what the Attorney General says and follow through on it, because what no one's been talking about is the responsibility of the parents regarding safety of the guns, as witness what happened in the Midwest. There's 350 different cities in Massachusetts. The argument can be made that they all have different rules regarding allegedly gun safety. It comes down to parental responsibility and what the Attorney General decides has to be done. You can't be waffling and hide behind, well, we're going to do it this way. It has to be one thing, and that's it. Anybody who's ever been shot at will tell you it's not a fun picnic.
Well, I appreciate Victor's bringing up his points. I appreciate Pat giving back the legal opinion, and Ronnie, I appreciate you chiming in as well. I prefer not having an echo chamber of thought and being able to glean ideas from other members that I haven't thought of yet. And so far this evening, that's already occurred for me. So I appreciate the discord and the civility in which it's happening. I did want to reply to something that happened in the chat as well, about who would cover the cost of installing cameras. That is not in the resolution itself. Obviously, home-based fleets owned by the district would pay for them themselves if they wanted to institute this. If it was a private vendor, many of them are already offering it as upgrades on their current bus fleets, and new buses coming out very often have those cameras already installed. They also have some aggressive new stop signs installed in some of the Midwestern states that extend all the way across the other side of the street. And if that sign is struck, it's considered a vehicle accident and it's reported as an accident as well. So there's some other states being very aggressive about the stop sign policies on their school buses. So I just wanted to say, it's not in the resolution who pays for it. It would really be up to the individual situation. I saw somebody with their hand up in the audience, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you. My name's a little bit more complicated, so Clary for short.
Larry, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm a fan of, well, both resolutions. The stops number 4 is a very big issue in our district. I'm here from Chelsea, Massachusetts. So for resolution number 3, I think I responded in a direct message by accident. It sounds to me like ultimately what is potentially the thought behind it might be more of like a gun safety refresher / reminder. And I do like the potential concept of having each district then be able to fine tune the equitable approach towards their tailored or more curated need, depending on their demographics and then their populations, right? Because realistically speaking, depending on that, it's more, yes, the parents do have a certain responsibility, but we also have to consider ghost guns. We have to consider our Second Amendment rights. And then we also have to consider there's a lot of factors, right? Because realistically speaking, we know that there's an amount of weapons that are legally on hand versus the ones that are not, and everybody's ability to have relationship with law enforcement is different. So I think are trying to be as diplomatic as possible to take all of those things into consideration, if I'm getting the information correctly. And then as far as number 4, resolution number 4, I do love the concept, especially because it is a huge problem. People in my district alone tend to just disregard all of the bus safety. There's tons of construction going on in Chelsea, and it's after school, before school, it's the witching hour, especially with traffic. Very few people respect the stop signs. I don't even, we get pictures of people just going around the bus. So that would be amazing. And I think if it came down to payment, what the city contribution alone would make, probably from the tickets being written out, is probably going to pay for itself within a very short period of time, even if they didn't have their own fleet. So that's just my little bit of contribution for that. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions about the 2 resolutions on student safety? Again, if something percolates as we're discussing other ones, please feel free to chime in. We are looking through the chat and trying to answer all the questions as we move forward. So Barbara, if you wouldn't mind going to resolution number 5, please. So we have some interesting ones this year that we embedded under resolutions on finance. This one, I believe, is a shot across the bow to the state legislature, really impacting districts that are minimal aid districts and what the state is requiring in Chapter 70 for the required minimum contribution. In the state of Massachusetts, municipalities are not allowed to raise taxes by more than 2.5%, plus whatever room they have left underneath the levy. But in a lot of cases, schools and towns have already pushed their tax base all the way to the levy, so they can only increase by 2.5% per year maximum. But some of the minimal contributions required by the state have been 4 and 5% the past several years in a row. That has resulted in municipalities having to cut other departments to the bone in order to pay the required minimum for their schools. This right here would allow municipalities to increase their taxes locally by the same percentage that their required minimum contribution is going up year by year. I don't think any of us want to do this at the municipal level to our neighbors and our fellow taxpayers in town. But again, this would be a very strong tool for Glenn and I and other members of MASC to go to the state legislature and say, you're putting this burden on us to fund the schools. We can only tax at 2.5. Why don't you let us tax at 4 or 5? And we'll just tie it right to your required minimum contribution. We're hoping that it would cause them to maybe back off or increase state aid. I don't think any of us actually want to see municipalities taxing higher than this at this point. Does anybody have any questions on this one? Because this one is loaded. I think it's pretty provocative, and I think it's meant to be provocative. I'm gonna look in the chat while I wait a minute for you guys. All right. So I don't hear anybody mentioning this one, so we'll move on to the
I
next
actually
one.
have a question. Sorry, I was a
Please,
little late
go
coming
ahead.
off of mute.
Oh.
My name's Amy Berry. I'm from East Bridgewater. Let me just apologize if I sound like a newbie, because I am. This is my first year and I'm just a few months
Welcome.
in.
Welcome.
So thank you. So just learning still. So based on what you just said, if it doesn't put pressure to get additional funding, then basically you're leaving towns and municipalities open to then taxing people at a higher rate.
Yeah,
Is that what we're saying?
I know it feels that way, but again, if we pass this at the delegate assembly in November, that would simply charge Glenn, anybody who is an official lobbyist for MASC, myself as the legislative chair and the incoming president, and other members to bring this topic to the forefront. I don't believe you would ever see MASC actually supporting legislation to put into law this. Again, it would be to bring to bear the spotlight on the disparity between our taxing authority at the local level and the required minimum contributions being forced on a lot of districts, especially those, again, who are minimal aid districts in the state.
Okay, thank you for explaining.
Absolutely. Like I said, this one is a little bit complicated. It's a little bit loaded, Amy. So I appreciate the question so I could clarify. All right. So MASC has created for the first time in over a decade a brand new committee, and that was the Rural Schools Committee. Our president, Mildred Lefebvre, commissioned this just last year, and we have an up and running Rural Schools Committee that has over 26 active members meeting every 2 or 3 months. Their next meeting is coming up in just a week from now. And there was a study commissioned by the legislature to look at the health and sustainability of rural school districts here in Massachusetts, came up with a comprehensive finding. And many of those findings of changes that could be made to aid our rural communities, coupled with a modest funding pool, was put into a law that was dramatically changed, went to a second and third reading, and by the time it actually got past this legislative cycle, did not bear any resemblance to the original rural schools bill. MASC has been committed to the full recommendations of the rural schools bill to be passed. And this again has been sponsored by several school districts in Massachusetts asking for MASC to continue supporting the rural schools to make sure that none of our students are overlooked, whether they're urban, suburban, or rural students. All of the students in the Commonwealth should have the same opportunities to achieve at their highest potential, regardless of their zip code. And that's what this is asking for, the rural schools to be considered and put as one of our main planks in our platform moving forward. Any questions on the rural schools bill? We've been talking about this for a couple of years. We have said some movement. It went from earmarks in the budget to $5 million 2 years ago to $16 million this year. The research states that those schools need about $60 million of dedicated funds, not to be earmarked, but to be guaranteed in state funding every single year for the health and sustainability of those districts, in addition to several regulatory changes that would not have a financial impact at all. All right. So I want to give a shout out to Everett and the Gateway school districts across the state. They really leaned into the Chapter 70 inflation index fiasco that we saw in Chapter 70 last year. The Chapter 70 inflation index was pegged at 1.7% for the budgets that we're all working with right now. Last spring was a difficult time for many school districts across the state when they saw how little their state aid was going up. Some school districts were seeing pretty level state aid funding. And for regional schools, we saw a dip in regional transportation aid. So our net aid in a lot of regional schools across the state was negative for FY25. The Gateway schools created a white paper. They combined forces, they did a couple seminars, and they put together some resolutions calling for the inflation index to be lifted. There's currently a cap of 4.5. They wanted it lifted because they're not just missing the inflation growth of regular Chapter 70 aid, they're missing out on the inflation growth of the Student Opportunity Act aid that they were guaranteed under the law that had specifically in it that it should grow with inflation. What we did with Everett's work on this at the MASC level is the whereases were wonderful, and MASC thoroughly appreciated the work that Everett School Committee put into this. We did change some of the language and therefore let it be resolved portion of this at the behest of the resolution subcommittee and the MASC board of directors. The language that you see in the therefore let it be resolved, we have already begun discussions with some of our partner legislators on Beacon Hill, and we believe that we can get this language passed in the next legislative cycle and even hopefully in the next budgetary year, FY26, to bring that much needed aid to our school districts. We did leave in the 4.5% cap. If we adjusted fully for inflation right now, we don't believe the state of Massachusetts would be able to stomach a one-time expenditure of 10 or 15% over where we are currently right now with Chapter 70. The language we have here would leave the cap at 4.5, but it would be maxed out at 4.5 every single year until we caught up with the inflationary growth that we realized at the local level. So again, we saw a 1.7% increase. And I think we can all attest to the fact that inflation was not 1.7 last year, nor has it been for the past several years. So entertain any questions you may have on the Chapter 70 aid inflation index. All right, seeing none.
Ronnie raised his hand.
Oh, I couldn't see it. Thank you, Ronnie.
All right, it's okay. With all the money that you're talking about, what happened to that money that we were supposed to be getting in the millionaire's tax?
Yep. So the Fair Share Amendment, the first year that they did it was last year, and they allocated $1 billion of the funds before they realized any receipts. They weren't quite sure how much they would make off it, Ronnie. And it was split about 54% to education, 46% to transportation and infrastructure. The legislature has recently come out saying they realized closer to $1.7 to $1.8 billion. So there is some money right now that's on the table that a lot of different interest groups are going after, as you can imagine. One of the interest groups is the MSBA, to try and get more funding for our school repairs and school construction. The vocational schools are extremely interested in getting greater allocations of funds for square footage based on their needs for their labs and their shops in vocational schools, and the fact that we have some wait list and we even have some areas of the state that don't have vocational opportunities. But MASC is looking into these funds as well for a variety of options, and we're currently working with legislative partners again to try and make sure we glean as much of that $800 million in excess this year and moving forward for our schools.
Okay, thank you. There's one other thing, I must have missed it. You know, for the individual districts throughout the state of Massachusetts, did I miss something about how much money they get from the state, each individual school district?
Well, the easiest way to do that, Ronnie, is to pull your cherry sheet from the Department of Revenue.
Okay,
Okay, and I'm happy to send you those links and directly to you, Ronnie. I have your email.
but off the top of your head, what the city of Boston gets, Boston Public Schools versus one of those rural areas versus Everett, it's not equal at all, is it?
It's not equal.
Nope.
It's a needs-based formula, and it's based largely on two things, and that's the property valuation of each piece of property in your town, and ironically, the income of each individual citizen of your town or city, which seems to be a disconnect since we're taxing property. I don't understand why income is a part of that factor. But ironically, it is, Ronnie. Those are the two biggest pieces that decide how much a town or a city can afford to spend. And then they do the full breakdown of how many kids you have in elementary school versus middle school versus high school. And then they subdivide those kids into categories like ELL, special ed, low income, vocational. There's so many categories. I don't want to go through them all. The Chapter 70 formula is extremely complex, but you're right, Ronnie. There's a.
I thought I was missing something.
You're not
No,
missing.
Ronnie, Anthony put the link to the cherry sheets in the chat.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate that.
All right, thank
If
you.
you have any questions, Ronnie, I'm happy to email back and forth with you on that.
Okay, thanks, thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So any questions on Resolution 7 about adjusting the inflation index? I think we could all use some extra state funding for our schools. I know a lot of districts used one-time funds to try and backfill last year. I know a lot of regionals dipped into E&D, their excess and deficiencies. That's like free cash for a town. I know there was a lot of Proposition 2.5 overrides last year, and many of them failed. If we don't have a little bit of relief from the state for FY26, I think last year was going to look like a rosy dream in the rearview mirror. So this is something we're really going to lean into, and hopefully gets passed at the resolution at the delegate assembly down the Cape this November. All right, Barbara, if you wouldn't mind going to the next one. All right. So Plymouth put this forth. I don't know how many of you know this, but Plymouth is one of the geographic largest towns in the entire state. They drive an extraordinary amount of miles, and my school district, Silver Lake Regional School District, sits right on top of them. And my entire region is smaller than their town. But as you all know, if you're part of regional schools, and you probably also know if you're not, regional school districts do get reimbursement for transportation. It was one of the original carrots dangled in front of towns back in the 1970s to get towns to form into regions. Plymouth would like to also have reimbursement for municipalities who drive extraordinary miles. And the language in this would seem pretty sound and wise. They want to come up with a circuit breaker type fund that towns could apply to on a needs-based and miles-based basis. But this again would just allow, again, MASC to go up to the State House and talk for some of the larger school districts in Massachusetts who've seen some of their contracts go up by 6, 7, 8% per year over the past several years, to say that we need some state aid to help non-regional school districts with their transportation cost. Again, We're hoping potentially the state will lean into this a little bit more. We've already told them that we have concerns that there are cabals amongst the transportation authorities of Massachusetts. Because often many of us only get one bid when we put our transportation contracts out. Right. And it could be coincidence or it could be something more nefarious. We have asked the state to look into that and do some investigation. And maybe if they have more financial skin in the game, maybe they will lean into that investigation a little bit stronger for us. Any questions on resolution number 8 from the Plymouth School Committee?
Well, I have a question in general.
Yeah.
So how often do these like original contracts get, because if it started off in the 70s, because I know like in Chelsea, like the transportation is a voluntary cost, right? Because we're under the two, so that's the bulk of essentially the bulk of our budget.
Yeah.
For transportation, because it's, but we can't, the city's not going to grow, we're not going to go back. Like I joked last year for, I'm the chair for our budget and finance, and everybody was like, Clara, you can't say that. I'm like, oh, we can't go back to Revere and conquer them so that we get that extra, we make the 2 miles, right? But so how often does some of that stuff get reviewed so that we can go back onto the table and go back to the state and say, hey, this is where we need additional funding so that it becomes equitable, right? Because we provide transportation only up until I believe middle school grades, and obviously with the larger groups like Plymouth, then at what point does it become a necessity to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, this was great in the 70s, but a lot has changed since the 70s.
Right. Well, first, I think Plymouth was pretty clear in saying that they didn't want part of the regional school transportation pie. It's more to what Ronnie said. We know that there's excess funds left over from the fair share amendment, and how are we going to utilize and allocate those? And ironically, school and pupil transportation fits both categories that those fair share funds should be going towards. So this is one of the areas of revenue we could look towards potentially in getting these funds looked at for larger municipalities and some densely populated urban settings. The last time this was looked at, there was a review of pupil transportation, and that was about 2018 or so. We did have a member of MASC who sat on that committee for us. And the report of that committee pretty much got put to bed when COVID broke out, and not many people paid attention to it since. I don't think it necessarily has the language in it that you or I would be looking for expanded funding from the state, but there was an acknowledgement that there needs to be some look at means testing potentially for reimbursement for some districts, which I believe your district would probably benefit from quite a bit, especially in addressing the equity around transportation for your students.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, any other questions about this one? I'm seeing none, so on to 9, Barbara. All right, MSBA. MSBA is a mess. There's not enough money to do everything we need it to do. Again, there's a limited pot of money. We keep finding little bits here and there. That fair share amendment, this is again, one of those areas we're looking at. And we're carving the fair share amendment already into several slices of pie. But there's a lot of people who agree that extraordinary relief and new construction MSBA is not coming through as well as we would hope. Senator Lewis, who is the chair of the Education Committee for the Senate side, he actually put forth an amendment to the state budget this year that's looking at MSBA's funding formula and trying to increase the funding for MSBA so it can meet its statutory obligation to all of us at the local level. I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of vocational technical schools would like to see their allocations increased to reflect the square footage needed for their modern labs in their schools. Sometimes they need more square footage per student than a conventional high school would, just because of the nature of the lessons their teachers are performing with students, and the need for that space for safety and for modern instruction to occur. So this again would be looking at increasing MSBA funding overall, and then looking at the needs at the elementary level for comprehensive high schools and for vocational and technical schools across the state.
So can I add something? I add a question here.
Emily, go ahead.
So my concern is that there are a lot of comprehensive high schools that have vocational technical programs in them,
Yes,
as we do in Quincy, and I would want to make sure that funding comes to those schools based on the square footage. So it shouldn't be for just regional vocational schools. It should be for any school that has a Chapter 74 program or is building one.
and I come from a district that has the same configuration as you do up in Quincy. So I echo those concerns. And again, this would be a menu for us to look at and to take into consideration. Should it be just based purely on square footage for a school, or should we subdivide categories out based on the programming at those schools? So I'm with you on that one, Emily.
Thank you.
Two people have their hands raised.
Yeah, you want to call on them, Barbara?
I can't figure out who they are.
Emily. Let's start with Emily.
The other Emily, hi.
Yep.
I'm
Hello.
I'm Emily Prenner. I'm from Newton. I have a question about, I completely support and agree with the evaluation and then of the MSBA grants. I think it's critical. But I guess I have a question for the Tri-County Regional Voc Tech High School Committee, really, more than anything. Because I understand the comprehensive high schools. I also understand the vocational technical schools as well. Newton has one. But my question is, why specifically elementary? Was there a reason to call that out versus just middle schools or other regular high schools?
You
Because
know,
there's such a need across the state
Right.
for building projects. So
absolutely. And I mean, just being focused so much on the vocational in Chapter 74 that Tri-County would have that lens. I think that's an important question to ask. And one of the opportunities we have here this evening is I'm recording the questions you have so I can share them back to the proponent districts.
Yeah.
So hopefully somebody from Tri-County will be absolutely able to stand up at the microphone and explain the rationale for why calling out elementary versus middle school, or, you know, traditional high school versus comprehensive versus Chapter 74 down the Cape in November for us. So
Great.
thank you for that question.
just one quick follow-up though. I
Yeah,
also
please.
know that last year, I think we had a broader MSBA resolution.
Mhm.
And I whilst I understand that it is a regional vocational technical high school committee that's making this, I would advocate that we expand beyond just that. But
Yep.
we'll
And
talk.
again, Emily, that's an opportunity that you and your district may want to have a conversation and propose an amendment and to send that to Glenn and MASC as soon as possible. So then we could share that out with the membership as well. So please feel free to take advantage of the amendment opportunities there. And Ronnie, I see your hand up too. Ronnie?
Yes, how much, with this, it's a 240 question. Elementary, comprehensive high school, vocational tech, agricultural. How much money are we talking about, firstly? And secondly, elementary and comprehensive high school, doesn't that relate to the scope of the projection of how many kids are coming into the schools?
Yeah, Ronnie, that's part of the formulation, is to do an analysis of the incoming classes all the way down as far as they can predict into the infants in the town and potential move-in opportunities. That definitely comes into the calculation of how many square feet are then allocated to that building process. The overall funding, I can't answer that question for you right now, Ronnie. What I can tell you is all of the funds for MSBA have been fully utilized every single year that I've been involved with school committees in Massachusetts. And you may recall just a couple of years ago, they had to halt the accelerated repair projects because they ran out of money midway through the fiscal year. So it's a question of examining how underfunded it is. And again, Senator Lewis's amendment to the budget, the state budget, would address those exact questions and come up with some real numbers for us to use in pushing forward for additional funding for MSBA, instead of us just reaching for pie in the sky numbers and not having data to support our arguments.
That concept that they had, the guy's last name was Cahill, and he was pushing to have 1 cent taken from every amount of money that was going to be raised to go for the MSBA. Nothing happened, did it?
Well, that was
believe-
the sales
believe-
tax.
I believe that is how the MSBA is currently funded, Ronnie.
But they didn't
Right.
raise all the money they thought they were going to raise with that 1 cent thing, did they?
Well, just not enough. The needs are too great.
Well, we all had some federal funds come through starting in the spring of 2020. And I believe you've all seen the escalating cost of projects now. With that free-flowing federal funding came price increases and inflation in any physical plant repairs and construction across the state. I don't think the 1 cent on the sales tax could keep up with the inflation we've seen, especially in the construction area. And for public buildings, being tied down to prevailing wage and the bid process that we're all encumbered by has really driven up the cost of any projects we're seeing at the school levels.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ronnie.
Hey, Jason.
Yes. Hey, Greg.
Hey.
How you doing?
You're doing well. I just actually joined about 2 minutes ago, but I wanted to comment. I heard the questions on this one, and I would suggest if folks can follow up with Tracy Stewart from our committee, who's our chair of our legislative subcommittee. But I just wanted to mention that I think the idea of this resolution recommendation was that there are costs that are different for each of the items listed, and I think the request here was that we consider advocating for different considerations. So maybe a science lab in a comprehensive high school or a comprehensive school might be different than, the needs might be different, the reimbursements might be different than an elementary school. And then in vocational technical high schools, there are things that you run into that for building projects, and we just recently went through this, that might be unique to that school's environment. I think the example I heard was if there was a dental program where you're learning how to use the X-ray equipment and the dental equipment, you might have to, embed lead in your walls or lead in your building process that would increase the cost of building something that would be kind of treated the same way as a regular wall in a comprehensive school in the current system. So I think the request here was to evaluate if there are opportunities or needs to make distinctions in the types of schools that were that are being considered by this. And I think that someone had mentioned potentially offering an amendment to expand it, and I won't be able to make the session this year, but I think it's definitely something that we looked at last year because of the differences in the projects. I definitely have learned a lot about school building projects from my time on the school committee. Have gone through a school building process. When I started, I thought it was just take the amount of money of your project and multiply it times the amount of money they're saying they're gonna reimburse you. Like, oh, we're giving you 53% back, so we're gonna multiply it by 53%. It's not nearly that straightforward. It really has certain maximums for different types of materials and different things like that. So I just wanted to comment on that. And Tracy's asking, but she's definitely the expert on it. But I think that was the idea. And I think if there was areas where this could expand, I can't speak for my committee, but I think that would be a good discussion for the delegate assembly.
Thanks, Greg, for chiming in on that, especially with your background from Tri-County. And you're right, Tracy is someone I've worked with pretty extensively on the legislative committee for MASC, and I will reach out to her with the questions from this conversation this evening. Appreciate it. And if we could move on to the next resolution, Barbara. Resolution 9 and Resolution 10 will be provided to the Delegate Assembly again as one of those slate opportunities to vote them both together, or with a simple majority, could be split and debated on their own merits. So, expansion for capacity in Chapter 70 vocational technical programs. I alluded to this earlier, but I just want to be a little bit more clear. Across the state, there's actually some towns and cities that don't have access to vocational programs for their students. Right here on the South Shore, the town of Pembroke used to be part of Silver Lake. That's where they got their vocational education. They broke away from the region, and for many, many years, we guaranteed them any of our leftover slots in our vocational program. But vocational programs' popularity has spiked in the past 4 years. So we now currently have a waiting list at Silver Lake Regional High School for our vocational program. 58% of our 8th graders last year applied for those slots. We have not had any space for Pembroke to come to our school. Since they were part of our region when the vocational school opened up here in the South Shore, they weren't charter members. They don't have the rights to those seats either. They're locked out. And there's some geographical areas in the state that just kind of look like vocational deserts, right? So we have waiting lists in a lot of cities and towns, and we also have places where kids just don't have access. This resolution is looking at expanding Chapter 74 programming across the state. There was an amendment put forth by Senator Cronin to do some vocational annexes by building small $1 to $4 million additions to high schools that already stand, to put some sort of technical lab or shop into those areas and to utilize them during the day for some students and even keep them open during the nighttime to allow additional students access to those programs. Many vocational schools have a day program and a night program to try and meet the need for vocational education for our 9th, 12th, 11th and 12th graders, 9 through 12 high school kids. They have day and night programs to try and meet the capacity, and we're still not meeting it in the state. So this would ask for the state to invest in Chapter 74 programs, either by expanding current vocational technical schools or even building some new ones in some of those areas of the state where kids don't have access. So sorry, I flubbed some of those words there. But Ronnie, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what you were saying. You know, you were saying that there were some schools that they're having daytime schools and evening schools, but you were focusing, whether you're meant to or not, you were focusing on kids. My skin in the game is as follows. Don't forget the adults, the ones who had to reinvent themselves against what they wanted to do. That's where the vocational technical programs are falling apart. They're not preparing themselves for the adults, the young adults, the ones who graduated from high school, whether it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Now they got to come back. You can't just leave them hanging out in the street with no job. You get what I mean? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Ronnie, there was that belief for quite some time in education that everyone needed to go to college to be successful, right? And we pushed a lot of people to go down that path who may have been more fulfilled or better suited for another path. And I totally understand the concept of the adult education and some of these spaces being utilized by those individuals to get retrained and to have that opportunity to fulfill themselves in a vocation. But again, we also have some students on the wait list too, not to diminish the adults either. I'd be happy for this resolution to pass to address both of our concerns moving forward.
I just, you know, as I said, my concern is about the young adults. They, you can't just wish them away. Whether
No.
they're young adults or they're in their 30s or 40s, and maybe they've gone to college and all of a sudden, whatever they were doing doesn't exist. And now they got to find something new. What are they going to do for their vocation?
We've also talked to Senator Rodriguez, who is the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, because he's heavily committed to vocational education in Massachusetts. And his number one concern, Ronnie, is that even with all of the kids who are currently in our vocational programs in Massachusetts, that we will not have enough licensed individuals in the trades in the next 5 to 10 years to satisfy all the needs of the citizens of Massachusetts, whether that be plumbing or electric or HVAC. We need to turn out more of these highly skilled individuals who can have a really nice gainful employment, but also to deliver the services and needs of the rest of us in the state who rely on those individuals to keep our lives, on track. So
do you have any idea or any inkling of what caused this desert of, like you were saying, plumbing, electricians, what caused this desert all of a sudden to show up?
I think that a lot of parents who may have been from the trades themselves really saw them moving their next generation up by sending them to college. And it was a point of pride to be able to say, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps so you could have a better life, not realizing that college doesn't necessarily equate to a better life for everyone. This is just coming from my 25 years as an educator, Ronnie. I've seen it time and time again, and you could feel the sea change occur right around when COVID hit, of people kind of taking a step back and realizing how fulfilling a life in the trades could be, how economically rewarding it could be, and how much more it fits some individuals' learning styles. And we've also seen it with the advent of project-based learning in the regular high schools. We're trying to move away from things like high-stakes testing and giving kids authentic assessments, real-world environment things to assess whether or not they're learning in their growth. So I think there's a big sea change in our entire country around this in the way that we're doing education. And we're at the tip of the spear here, looking at increasing Chapter 74. Our vocational programs in Massachusetts are the guide light for the rest of the country to follow after, but that doesn't mean that there's not areas to improve upon.
Thanks. Thank you.
Absolutely. So last but not least, we are, for the first time as an association, readopting some resolutions that would be expiring. It was incumbent upon school districts from across the state over the last year to put forward resolutions from MASC's catalog of expiring resolutions to continue forward. Now, Barbara, I'm not going to go through all of these for the sake of everyone in this meeting. But if you want to feel free to scroll through them as I'm talking about it, that would be awesome. So all of the resolutions that were expiring passed by a vast majority, if not unanimous votes of past delegate assemblies. These are part of the current platform of MASC. And if we vote to advance these expiring resolutions, they will continue to be planks in MASC's platform for the next 3 years. Again, we created a bylaw change last year to allow some of the older resolutions to expire and to fall off the rolls. As you saw tonight, we discussed 10 pretty meaty resolutions to be put forward. And we have ones from years past we're still working on. So the whole point of the expiring resolutions is to give us room to breathe and focus on what the association currently has voted for us to pay attention to. And these readoption ones, as you can see, largely uncontentious and again, widely supported when they were first passed by the delegate assembly. And I will be proposing all of the expiring resolutions as a slate not to be split by the delegate assembly when we're down the Cape, with that rationale that I just provided to you all here this evening. Do any of you have any questions about the expiring resolutions that we're going to be bringing forth down at the Cape in November?
Sorry, not so much the expiring resolutions, but just because this would be my first time at the Cape, where can I see the full list of the resolutions so that I can have a proper understanding of everything? And I'm just gonna mute myself again before you guys get more of a screaming children.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. So
I'm like, I know that most of you guys are educators, so you probably don't want to hear that. The booklet that I received today.
did you get this booklet?
Yes, I believe so.
So that has all of the language, including
Wonderful.
the language for the expiring resolutions.
Thank you.
So we didn't just put the titles in, we put all of the language for you. And I'm more than happy to take emails directly from any one of you, all of you, to try and help you understand them, to answer your questions, to clarify, to make it a smoother process for you once you get down the Cape. And I will be there before the resolutions committee also for the little debrief. So if anybody has last minute questions, you can come to that meeting and we can have a conversation prior to the delegate assembly. And once the
All-
delegate assembly starts, find some nice people to sit next to who will explain things to you. Because I'll be up at the podium at the front of the room trying to contain everyone and control the excitement and the enthusiasm that some members show during the delegate assembly.
Yeah, you can
can I
feel free to
request-
sit next to me.
Can I request like a sun sticker for the happy people that we should be sitting next to, just so
you
that we
just
can
got-
identify the people that we should sit next to?
Barbara, who is
I am Barbara.
the chair of Division 3, she just offered to sit next to you down the delegate assembly. And I couldn't suggest a better person for you to meet up with down there. It's an
That can
opportunity.
be like glue.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for all of us to talk to other people who walk in the same shoes we walk in. There's not a lot of people who understand what it's like to be on a school board, on a school committee. And we have certain restrictions, and sometimes we have certain relationships with people on our own boards that we don't exactly want to express ourselves and have those deep conversations with. The Cape is the perfect place for you to find some of your people so you can have those open and honest conversations that won't go back and affect the work you need to do back in your own school committee. So welcome to the family. I'm glad to have you. I'm glad you came tonight. Glad everybody showed up for this.
And also, if I could say, there's supposed to be a learning lunch on the resolutions. Although I don't know whether it's been rescheduled because it was originally scheduled for Rosh Hashanah. So I haven't seen an updated date. So hopefully there'll be that also before the conference. And
I will leave that in the hands of the office. Anthony's saying working to reschedule it. And before I sign off for this evening, I just want to thank the staff who turned out tonight. Glenn's here with us, our executive director. Anthony is behind the scenes answering chats and scheduling things for us. Pat Francomano, our legal counsel, has chimed in, and he's always there to give me good advice, so I make sure I don't hurt myself or the association.
and Glenn has a finger up.
I want to
Just
say hi to
wanted-
Jennifer too. Hi, Jennifer.
I just wanted to point out Jennifer's here. Jennifer's the person who puts together the delegate manual. So if you understand all the language and are able to follow it through, she gets the credit.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Appreciate it, Jennifer.
Hi, I just wanted to say something too. I was one of, my name is Mayra Valderas and I'm a school committee too in Chelsea. And I used to be with you guys for the student aid, and I was one of the persons who gave my testimony in the State House with my son with the special needs. And I think you are doing a great job. And I was looking forward to kind of like, meet with you guys again. And I mean, what you're doing right now, I feel like it's gonna make a difference and it's gonna change a lot because we need to, keep moving and keep changing. We're not gonna change from day to night, but if we do something, a little bit at a time, we can make a difference. And now I'm in school committee. I never know that I was gonna be in a school committee, so I'm very happy for it. And anything that you need from me, I mean, I'm here to help.
I think that was the most eloquent closing remarks we could ever ask for as an association. Well said, and welcome to the family. And thank
Yeah,
you for being here with us tonight.
thank you.
And I want to thank you all for coming. This is certainly the best Division 3 turnout we've had since I've been chair, which has only been since last November. But thank you all for coming and for the really great questions.
The cherry sheet that Jason was talking about, is that going to be sent to everyone?
So I believe it was sent in the chat to you all
Right.
this evening. I can send it back out to everyone who's
Yeah,
on the
my-
listserv, Ronnie, but I also have your personal email, so I'll reach out to you personally.
They also sent, Anthony sent it before the meeting and I went through it. That's why, I didn't say that much questions because it was long, but I went through it. So they send us in the email the invitation of the meeting. So you're gonna find it there too.
Right. And again, anytime you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out using the listserv or emailing staff or officers, and we'll do our best to get back to you with good information as soon as we can.
This was really good. This was really good. Hi, Glenn.
Hey,